Hello, my name is Philip Totaro. I'm the founder and CEO of market research firm IntelStor. Welcome to your weekly dose of truth to power. Truth to Power examines data driven insights for the energy sector with a focus on renewables. On this week's episode, we dissect the recent meetings of Brazilian President Lula da Silva in China and the announcements made by Yunda Wind Power, CGN, and Envision Energy to invest in the Brazilian market. Brazilian President Lula da Silva visited China last week, along with some of his senior advisors and cabinet, to strike deals to increase Chinese investment in Brazil. They were reasonably successful, you'd have to say, with more than $1.5 billion committed. And I'll dive into precisely what those deals are. But while the Brazilian energy market has had some challenges of late and non hydro renewable power generation has been a bit stagnant, the market still holds promise for growth, and China wants to be a part of it. The electricity market in Brazil currently has more than 210 gigawatts of power generation capacity, according to IntelStor's data. A total of 86% of Brazil's electricity generation is renewable. This includes more than 50% from hydroelectric plants, almost 23% from thermal plants, 16% from wind, and 8% from solar. But a market this heavy on hydro has introduced some challenges to the power auctions as well as merchant market prices offered to wind and solar. Nevertheless, Chinese companies already have a presence in Brazil and they tend to play a very long term game. This includes State Grid Corporation of China, which owns a utility company in Brazil. State Power Investment Corporation also develops projects there. China General Nuclear Power also has a subsidiary in Brazil with substantial presence in renewables. Goldwind took over the GE Vernova factory in Bahia several years ago and was already serving the market with nacelle repowering from China since 2018. Goldwind's blade supplier, or one of their blade suppliers, Sinoma, has a small factory footprint in Brazil, and they've also expressed interest in increasing their market share there. Ming Yang has signed an MOU for investigating the offshore wind market, which is still trying to get off the ground. But in the wake of President Lula's visit to China, it was announced that Yunda Wind Power, more commonly referred to in the West as Windy, has signed an MOU to establish a research and development center in the country. This is typically a first step to a more permanent presence in that market and the establishment of a factory there. And Goldwind's factory in Bahia has now produced the first domestic GWH 181 6.2 megawatt turbines that will actually be installed in a 105.4 megawatt project for State Power Investment Corporation. Rui Costa, the director of the civil office of the Brazilian presidential palace, actually held a discussion with Goldwind during the president's visit to China and conveyed his recognition and provided Goldwind with a bit of an award, but also underscored the importance of Goldwind and Chinese companies' investment in Brazil in general. Also, coming out of these high level meetings last week, Envision Energy has announced a $1 billion investment in a facility to produce sustainable aviation fuel, which would be powered by renewable energy. Now, this type of project will actually be welcomed and help facilitate more renewable power offtake that's not dependent on traditional power auctions or a merchant market. Those auctions, which are typically held annually, have seen a sharp decline in the frequency in the past 3 years due to disputes between independent power producers and grid operators over tariffs, as well as the amount of hydropower that is allowed to have dispatch priority, which undercuts other renewables. In the meantime, China General Nuclear Power has announced plans to increase their renewable energy asset capacity in Brazil. Brazil on the back of these recent meetings between President Lula and Chinese officials. They're looking at a total of 1.4 gigawatts of new solar, wind, and energy storage projects. The company has signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of the northeastern state of Piauí. They indicated their intent to invest over 3 billion Brazilian reais. Now, the other reason there's been significant interest in Brazil by Chinese OEMs and other supply chain companies has been due to the offshore wind market potential. As I mentioned before, Ming Yang has already signed preliminary agreements to go investigate the markets in the northeastern states. And several Chinese project developers and supply chain companies are looking to be early movers in that market. According to IntelStor's data, Brazil now has more than 103 offshore wind projects proposed for a total of 244.6 gigawatts. That's actually more than all of the power generation capacity operational in Brazil today. And unfortunately, there isn't enough demand yet in the domestic market to support that level of power offtake. Additional work still needs to be done on permitting mechanisms, the auctions, and power offtake, as well as a resolution to some of these overlapping project layouts that have been proposed by different project developers. The good news is that the first auction for offshore power offtake is expected to take place later this year, and the laws governing offshore wind are being finalized in the Brazilian parliament as I speak. Meanwhile, Chinese developers, investors, and supply chain companies have been at the forefront of cultivating this global market opportunity, whereas many Western companies have given up on Brazil. This could end up being a costly mistake for the Western companies who may find that their lack of faith in the long term prospects of the Brazilian market will cost them market share to the Chinese in the end. Companies like GE Vernova and Siemens Gamesa want to be able to get back into the Brazilian market in a robust way, but they may find that their market share has completely evaporated and been taken over by the likes of Goldwind and Ming Yang. Thank you for joining me this week. I'm Philip Totaro, and this has been your weekly dose of truth to power. Follow us on IntelStor's YouTube channel as well as your favorite audio platforms, and visit www.intelstor.com to join more than 200,000 subscribers to our renewable energy data solutions. A full analysis of the market dynamics in Brazil and the rest of the world is available to IntelStor data platform subscribers.